VIP woman throws food at black waitress, not knowing her employer was the Mafia boss. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a busy evening at the exclusive 5-star restaurant, the kind where the chandeliers glittered like diamonds and the air smelled of freshly prepared gourmet meals. The dining room was full of well-dressed guests, enjoying their expensive dinners. Among them was a VIP woman, clearly accustomed to a life of privilege, her every move commanding attention. At the table next to hers sat a young black waitress, trying her best to remain invisible as she weaved through the crowded room, balancing plates and glasses with grace. Her uniform was pristine, but her eyes were tired, reflecting the weariness of a life spent in the background, catering to the needs of others. As she moved closer to the VIP woman's table, the woman's sharp voice pierced through the hum of conversation. "Excuse me," she sneered. "You missed my drink refill. Can't you do anything right?" The waitress paused for a moment, caught off guard by the harsh tone. She nodded silently and went to fill the glass, trying to shake off the insult. But the woman wasn't done. "How dare you keep me waiting? I'm not paying for this kind of service." She suddenly threw her plate of food directly at the waitress, the contents splattering across her uniform. The room fell into stunned silence. The waitress stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation as food dripped from her clothes. She felt the eyes of every guest in the restaurant on her, judging, whispering, some even smirking. But it wasn't the VIP woman's words or actions that cut the deepest. It was the indifference of the other customers, the way they did nothing but watch. The waitress, though shaking with embarrassment, remained silent. She was used to this. She had learned long ago that speaking up could lead to worse consequences. As the VIP woman continued to berate her, a figure at the back of the room stirred. A man in a sharp suit, his presence commanding the room without a word. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing at once. It was the Mafia boss, the one person in the room who was always in control. He had been watching the exchange from the shadows, his expression unreadable. His reputation was built on fear and respect, a man who never let anyone cross him without facing consequences. But today, as he watched the waitress, something shifted in his chest. He had seen her around the restaurant before, quiet, dignified, always doing her job without complaint. And now, she was being humiliated, and for some reason, that didn't sit right with him. As the VIP woman laughed arrogantly, oblivious to the growing tension in the room, the Mafia boss rose from his seat. His eyes locked onto the woman, and with a single, deliberate stride, he moved toward her table. The atmosphere changed immediately. The VIP woman's smug expression faltered as she noticed him approaching. She straightened up, but her confidence quickly faded when she saw the cold determination in his gaze. The room grew still, and the energy shifted. This was not a man who was easily ignored. The Mafia boss stood behind the waitress, his presence so commanding that even the most arrogant people in the room could feel the weight of his stare. He looked down at the woman who had thrown food at the waitress and said in a voice that cut through the silence like a knife, "You will leave this place. Now, I hope everyone is still with us after the shocking events that unfolded in the restaurant." The silence in the room was deafening as the VIP woman, caught off guard by the Mafia boss's sudden intervention, slowly stood from her seat, her face pale with fear. The other guests, who had been whispering and watching in silence, seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. The waitress, still standing there with the food splattered on her uniform, was left frozen in shock. But it was at that moment that something unexpected happened. The Mafia boss turned to the waitress, his cold, calculating expression softening slightly. His dark eyes, which had once held only the sharpness of a predator, now looked at her with something more human. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but not unkind. For a brief moment, the waitress didn't know how to respond. She had expected to be scolded, even dismissed, for causing a scene, but instead, She found herself at the center of a rare moment of empathy from someone who had always been untouchable. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, "I'm fine, sir." The Mafia boss's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned back to the woman who had humiliated her. He didn't need to say another word. The VIP woman's defiance vanished like smoke. She had no idea who she had just offended, and the realization was beginning to settle in. The boss, without a single word to the woman, snapped his fingers. Two of his bodyguards immediately moved to her side, their presence overwhelming. "You," the boss said, pointing directly at the VIP woman. "You are no longer welcome here. I suggest you leave before things get much worse for you." The VIP woman's eyes darted nervously around the room. The other guests, who had been watching the spectacle with curiosity, now looked away, unwilling to be caught in the storm that was about to hit. But it wasn't just the woman who was being sent away. It was her entire demeanor, her attitude, that was being eradicated with a single command from the Mafia boss. The woman, trembling, backed away, her pride shattered. As she stumbled out of the restaurant, the room remained silent, but there was a new sense of respect in the air. The Mafia boss turned back to the waitress, still standing where he had left her. "You don't need to clean that up," he said, his voice commanding but softer than before. "Go get yourself cleaned up. I'll have someone take care of this mess." The waitress, still in disbelief, didn't quite understand what was happening. She had been humiliated in front of all these people, but now she was being treated with unexpected kindness. She nodded and walked slowly toward the back of the restaurant, her thoughts racing. As she entered the staff area, she could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, all of them silently asking what had just happened. But she couldn't explain. She didn't fully understand herself. It wasn't until she was alone in the small bathroom that she finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her hands trembled as she tried to clean the food from her uniform, but the shock of it all was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the Mafia boss had returned to his table. His presence still loomed over the room, like an unspoken rule that no one dared break. He sat back down, his posture relaxed, but his eyes constantly scanning the room, ensuring everything was in order. A quiet murmur began to spread among the other patrons. The rumors were already circulating. It was known that this man, this untouchable figure, was no ordinary guest. His influence reached far beyond the walls of this restaurant. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that he had just made a choice that could change everything for one humble waitress. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a connection that would alter both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. And as the night continued, the Mafia boss sat in silence, his thoughts drifting to the waitress. There was something about her that caught his attention. It wasn't just the way she had handled the humiliation with grace, nor was it the way she had silently accepted her fate. It was something deeper, something that even he, with all his years of experience in this cold world, hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine strength. The night dragged on, and as the restaurant began to empty, the Mafia boss remained in his seat, still observing. The waitress, having cleaned herself up, was getting ready to leave for the night when she was called to the back. The boss had asked to speak to her. Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea why he wanted to talk to her, but she couldn't avoid it. Slowly, she made her way back to the private dining room, where the boss waited. The room was quieter now, the lights dimmer. "You did well tonight," the boss said as she entered, his tone not just polite, but oddly respectful. She stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to respond. The man who controlled the city's underworld was complimenting her? "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't expecting this." The boss smiled, but it wasn't the usual cold smile she had seen from him before. There was something softer in it now, something genuine. "Neither was I." His voice dropped a little, almost conspiratorial. "You'll be seeing a lot more of me. I hope you all are still with us after the unexpected twist in the restaurant." As the night carried on, the atmosphere in the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. The waitress, still in shock from the events that had unfolded, couldn't shake the image of the Mafia boss. His presence had been commanding, yet oddly reassuring, and she found herself wondering what had driven him to protect her, someone who was just another face in the crowd. The next day at work, the tension was palpable. Her co-workers barely spoke to her, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The rumors about what had happened the night before were spreading fast. Some of them were even speculating about the Mafia boss's interest in her. She tried to block it out, focusing instead on the mundane tasks of clearing tables and serving customers. But she couldn't deny that something inside her had changed. She had never been treated like that before. She had never had someone stand up for her in such a public, powerful way. As she passed through the kitchen, she was startled when the head chef called her over. "Hey, the boss wants to speak to you." Now, she froze. The boss? Her heart skipped a beat. The boss had already made his interest in her known, but she had never expected him to contact her again. Slowly, she made her way to the private office in the back of the restaurant, her hands trembling with each step. The door creaked as she entered, and there he was, sitting behind the desk. His presence was as imposing as ever, yet today, something in his demeanor was different. He didn't speak immediately, his dark eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You handled yourself well last night. I respect that." She stood there, unsure of what to say. Her mind raced with questions, but all she could do was nod. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. "But I don't understand. Why are you helping me? I'm just a waitress." The Mafia boss leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. For a moment, he didn't answer, as if weighing his words carefully. "You're not just a waitress," he finally said, his gaze softening just a little. "You're someone who has dignity, even when people try to strip it from you. And that's rare." The words hung in the air, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest, though she was still confused by his attention. Why was he saying these things to her? She had never been someone of importance, just another face in the crowd, just another worker in a world that barely noticed people like her. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice low but steady. "But I've decided I want you to work for me, full time." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you a position, one that will take you out of this place. You'll be working directly for me, handling things on a different level. I can offer you a better life, if you're willing to accept it." She was stunned. The idea of leaving the restaurant, leaving the life she had known for so long, was terrifying. But at the same time, it felt like a chance. A chance at something more, something beyond the endless cycle of menial work. But there was still one question that lingered in her mind. "Why me?" The Mafia boss didn't hesitate. "Because you're strong," he said simply. "I don't offer this to just anyone. I've seen how you carry yourself, how you don't back down. That's the kind of person I need in my life." She stood there for a long moment, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Could she really take this offer? Could she leave everything behind? It wasn't just the job she was being offered. It was an entirely new life. A life that might not be easy, but it was a life that promised respect and power. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll accept," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll work for you." The Mafia boss nodded, a slight smile curving his lips. "Good. I'll have someone arrange everything. You start tomorrow." As she left his office, her heart was still pounding, but there was something else. There now hope. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a chance to prove herself, to show the world that she was more than just a waitress. And as she walked back to the staff area, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would she be able to handle this new life? Would the Mafia boss's promise of a better life really come true? Only time would tell, but she was ready to face it head-on. I hope everyone is ready for what's coming next. After accepting the Mafia boss's offer, the waitress, now no longer just a waitress, was thrust into a world that was as foreign to her as it was enticing. The next morning, she stood outside a luxurious building, the gleaming marble walls reflecting the rising sun. She had been given a new identity, a new role, and she was about to step into a life she never thought possible. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew this would be the beginning of something that would change everything. As she entered the building, the air felt different, thicker, more intense. The building was sleek, modern, and intimidating. It had the unmistakable feel of power, a place where decisions were made in silence, where wealth and influence flowed through the walls. She was led through a long corridor by a man in a suit, his expression unreadable. He didn't say much, but his presence made it clear that she was now in the heart of a different world, one where even a misplaced glance could cost her everything. When they finally reached the office, the door opened, revealing the Mafia boss, seated at a large, imposing desk. His eyes met hers as she entered, and for the first time, she saw something different in his gaze. It wasn't just power. It was something warmer, more personal. "You're here," he said, his voice calm. But there was a sense of approval in his tone that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of something big. "I trust you'll be able to handle what comes next." She nodded, unsure of what that meant, but determined to prove herself. The first task he gave her was unexpected. He didn't just want her to work for him. He wanted her to help him run his empire. The waitress, now working directly for the Mafia boss, was thrust into the underworld, meeting influential people, learning the rules of power, and discovering a life she had never even imagined. As the days passed, she found herself not just observing, but becoming an active participant in his world. She learned how to manage complex deals, how to read people, how to spot danger before it struck. It was overwhelming at first, but with each passing day, she grew more confident, more capable. But it wasn't just the work that was changing her. It was the relationship with the Mafia boss. Every time they met, he seemed to see something in her, something she didn't know was there. He pushed her, yes, but he also supported her, in ways that made her wonder if he saw her as more than just an employee. One evening, after a particularly stressful meeting, the Mafia boss called her into his office. The usual coldness in his demeanor had softened, and for the first time, she saw a man who was tired, someone who carried more than just the weight of his empire. "You did well today," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know it's not easy, but you're proving yourself. I'm starting to trust you." The words hit her harder than she expected. Trust. That was a word she hadn't heard from anyone in a long time. He didn't have to say it. She could feel it in the way he spoke to her, in the way he relied on her to handle things with care, with precision. It was more than just business. But she couldn't let herself get distracted. She had a job to do, and she needed to stay focused. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I won't let you down." He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, without warning, he stood up and walked over to her, stopping just a few inches away. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The space between them was charged, filled with an unspoken tension that neither of them had acknowledged until now. "I know you won't," he said quietly, his voice low. "That's why you're here." His words lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about power and control. Maybe there was something more. But before she could think further, he turned away, returning to his desk. "Go home for tonight. We'll discuss more tomorrow." She nodded, though she could feel the weight of his words lingering. As she left the office, the silence of the building seemed more oppressive than ever. She was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. But as she walked down the hallway, she couldn't help but wonder what this meant for her. The Mafia boss had offered her more than just a job. He had offered her a place in his world. And now, she had to decide what that meant for her future. I hope you're still following along as the story takes another unexpected turn. The days after that conversation in the office felt like a blur to the waitress. Each one was filled with new responsibilities, new challenges, and a growing sense of dread. She had started to become more involved in the boss's operations, handling everything from logistics to negotiations, but the deeper she went into his world, the more she felt like she was losing herself. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with a rival group, the Mafia boss called her into his office. His expression was unreadable, as usual, but there was something in the air, a tension that made her heart race as soon as she stepped inside. He didn't greet her with his usual calm. Instead, he motioned for her to sit, his dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her uneasy. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice low. "The decisions we make in this world have consequences. You knew that coming in, but I'm not sure if you truly understand the weight of it." She sat down, trying to steady her breathing. The words were heavy, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the life she had chosen. The Mafia boss leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "You're no longer just a waitress. You're part of something much bigger now. And that means you will have to make difficult choices, choices that can affect the lives of others." She swallowed hard, trying to suppress the growing anxiety in her chest. "What kind of choices?" The boss's gaze softened just a fraction, but his voice remained stern. The kind that decide who lives and who dies. The kind that decides who wins and who loses. Every deal, every move we make is like a game of chess, and the wrong move can cost us everything. Her stomach twisted. She had known this world wasn't kind, but the reality of it was far more brutal than she had imagined. I'm not asking you to be ruthless, he continued, but I need you to be sharp. I need you to understand that you can't afford to be weak in this line of work. People will take advantage of that. She nodded, but her mind was racing. Was she really cut out for this? The life he was asking her to embrace felt like it was slowly suffocating her. I don't want you to become like them, the boss said, almost as if reading her thoughts. But you must be prepared to act when the time comes. His words were clear, but the weight of them settled heavily in her chest. She wasn't sure she could handle it. I'll do my best, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. I know you will. But remember, you're not alone in this. I've got your back. Just don't forget who you're working for. As she left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She was being drawn deeper into his world, and she wasn't sure if she could pull herself out. The next few days felt like a blur. The work kept piling up, and with it, the pressure. But there was also something else, something she couldn't ignore. The Mafia boss was changing. She had always seen him as a cold, calculating figure, someone who used fear and power to get what he wanted. But recently, there had been moments where she saw a glimpse of something else. A softer side, a side that cared. He had become more protective of her, always checking in, always making sure she was okay. At first, she dismissed it as part of the job, but now she wasn't so sure. One evening, after a long day of running errands and making deals, she found herself sitting in the office with him again. This time, there was no business to discuss, no deals to close. It was just the two of them, in the quiet of the room. The atmosphere was different, more intimate than she had ever expected. You've been working hard, he said, his voice low and steady. I don't want you to burn yourself out. She looked up at him, surprised by his concern. I'm fine, she replied, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. He studied her for a moment before standing up and walking over to the window. You've come a long way since the first day I met you. I can see that you're stronger now. But don't forget that you're still human. She didn't know what to say to that. Was he trying to protect her? Or was he just keeping her close, a tool to use in his empire? The thoughts swirled in her mind, and for a brief moment, she considered walking away. But she knew she couldn't. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. The Mafia boss turned to face her again, his gaze locking with hers. I trust you, he said, his words carrying more weight than she expected. And I need you to trust me, too. She didn't know how to respond to that. She wanted to trust him, but there was something inside her that hesitated. Could she really trust a man who lived in a world filled with lies and betrayal? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability. For the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't so different from her. Maybe he, too, was trying to survive in a world that demanded too much. And maybe, just maybe, they were both looking for something more than just power. As the night went on, the conversation shifted, and they spoke about other things, things that weren't related to business or power. It was a strange kind of peace, and for the first time since she had entered this world, she felt a sense of connection. But even then, in the back of her mind, the nagging question remained. Was this a friendship, or was it something else? I hope everyone is ready for the next twist in this story. The days following that conversation with the Mafia boss had been a mix of uncertainty and discovery. The waitress, now fully embedded in the Mafia world, found herself caught in a whirlwind of events that she could barely keep up with. Yet, despite the chaos, there was a sense of purpose that had begun to form within her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming part of something much bigger than herself. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with one of the boss's business associates, the Mafia boss called her into his office again. This time, there was something different in the air. He was already standing by the window when she entered, looking out over the city with a distant expression. As she approached, he turned to face her, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. I have something important to discuss with you, he said, his voice steady but tinged with an unspoken seriousness. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. "What's going on?" she asked, her own curiosity rising. The boss took a deep breath before speaking again. "There's a situation I need you to handle. It's delicate, and it could get ugly if not dealt with quickly. I need someone who can think on their feet, someone I can trust." She nodded, but a sense of unease settled in her stomach. This wasn't the kind of task she had expected. "What do you need me to do?" The boss's gaze hardened. "We've been keeping an eye on a few people, business rivals who've been causing problems. They're becoming more brazen, and it's time to send a message. But I need someone who can get close to them, someone who can operate without drawing attention." She took a step closer, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She knew this world wasn't kind, but hearing it in such stark terms made her realize just how far she had come. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that were beginning to creep up on her. "Good," he replied, his tone slightly softer. "I knew I could count on you." As he spoke, a part of her felt like she was stepping into the darkness, but another part, one she hadn't fully acknowledged until now, felt empowered. She was being trusted. She was being given a chance to prove herself in a way she never thought possible. The following days were filled with preparation. The boss gave her the details of the operation, who the target was, what information they had gathered, and how she was to approach the situation. It was a delicate balance of blending in and gathering information without raising any suspicion. She spent the next few days following leads, interacting with people she would never have crossed paths with before. She found herself in places that felt both dangerous and thrilling, secret meetings in dimly lit rooms, whispered conversations in back alleys. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, and for the first time, she felt truly alive. It wasn't easy, but she was learning. She was learning how to navigate this world, how to read people, how to manipulate situations without them even realizing. And through it all, the Mafia boss's words echoed in her mind. "I trust you." The more she proved herself, the more she realized how deep her connection with him had grown. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about something more personal, something she couldn't quite define. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting, the boss called her into his office again. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no business to discuss, just the two of them. As she walked in, he looked up from his desk and smiled. "You did well," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I've seen the way you handle things. You're learning quickly." She felt a flush of pride at his words, but there was something else, too, a sense of uncertainty. She had never expected to feel so connected to this man, so invested in his world. But the more she became a part of it, the harder it became to separate herself. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, her voice steady, but her heart racing. The boss stood up and walked over to her, his presence filling the room. "You're doing more than that," he said quietly, his eyes locking onto hers. "You're becoming someone important to me, someone I can rely on." She didn't know how to respond to that. The weight of his words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. The room was charged with tension, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the office, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, the boss turned away and returned to his desk. "Get some rest," he said, his tone shifting. "Back to business. You'll need it for tomorrow." She nodded, though her mind was still spinning. As she left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She was no longer just a worker in his world. She was becoming something more. And whether she liked it or not, she was starting to care. The Mafia boss had promised her a life she never thought possible, and she was beginning to realize just how far she was willing to go for it. I hope you're ready for what comes next, because this chapter takes a dramatic turn. The days following her last meeting with the Mafia boss had been a whirlwind of new tasks, new challenges, and, strangely, a new sense of purpose. The waitress, now fully embedded in the boss's world, found herself in deeper than she had ever expected. She was no longer just an employee. She was part of something much bigger, and that realization weighed heavily on her. It had been a week since the last time they spoke alone. The Mafia boss had become more distant, his cold exterior harder to read than before. He was still giving her tasks, still trusting her with important decisions, but there was a noticeable shift in the air between them. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but something had changed. She had always known that this life wasn't without its dangers, but now she was beginning to feel the full weight of it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she found herself standing in front of the boss's office again. She had just wrapped up a meeting with one of his associates, someone who had been less than cooperative, and she was mentally exhausted. The door to his office opened, and she stepped inside, ready to get the debriefing over with. The boss was sitting behind his desk, his face unreadable. He didn't immediately look up when she entered, but she knew better than to interrupt him. "Close the door," he said without looking up, his voice low. She did as instructed, the soft click of the door closing echoing in the quiet room. He finally looked up, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension in the air palpable. "How did the meeting go?" he asked, his voice colder than usual. "It went as expected," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I handled it." The boss nodded, though his expression didn't soften. "You're getting good at this," he said, his tone still distant. "But you need to be careful. There are people watching you." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" "Not everyone here is loyal," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You're moving up, and that makes you a target. You're valuable now, and people will do whatever it takes to bring you down. You need to watch your back." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had always known that this world was dangerous, but hearing it from him, so matter-of-factly, made it feel real in a way it never had before. The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time, she felt the true gravity of the life she had chosen. "I'll be careful," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But what about you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. The boss's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk in front of him. "I've been in this world a long time," he said quietly. "I've learned how to protect myself. But that's not the same as having someone you trust watching your back." She felt her heart skip a beat. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. It was the first time he had said anything like that to her, the first time he had shown any hint of vulnerability. She didn't know what to say. The Mafia boss stood up and walked over to the window, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and she was left standing in the center of the room, her thoughts racing. "I don't trust easily," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "But I trust you." The words were like a shock to her system. She had never expected to hear him say that, and it left her momentarily speechless. She didn't know how to respond. "You've earned my trust," he continued, still facing the window. "And I won't let anyone hurt you. But that means you have to be smart. You have to be aware of who's around you, who's watching. You can't let your guard down, not even for a second." She nodded, though the weight of his words was settling deeper inside her. It wasn't just about being a part of his world anymore. It was about surviving in it. She had to be smarter, tougher, more aware than she had ever been before. As the days passed, she found herself constantly on edge. The boss's warning echoed in her mind, and she began to see the cracks in the people around her. There were whispers in the halls, subtle glances from those who had once been friendly. She realized just how true his words had been. There were people who didn't have her back. But there was also something else. She had started to see the cracks in the boss, too. There were moments when she caught him staring into space, moments when the weight of his decisions seemed to catch up with him. He wasn't invincible, no matter how much he tried to make it seem that way. And that thought, strangely enough, made her feel closer to him. They were both trapped in this world, both trying to navigate the darkness while pretending they didn't care about the light. But the more she worked with him, the more she began to wonder, was he really as untouchable as he seemed? Or was he just another man, struggling to keep control of his empire while fighting his own battles behind closed doors? As she continued to navigate this dangerous world, she found herself becoming more entwined with the boss, emotionally, mentally, and maybe even something deeper. She wasn't sure if it was a bond born of respect or something more complicated, but either way, it was becoming impossible to ignore. I hope you're ready for the next chapter in this story, as things are about to take another turn. After the conversation with the boss, the waitress, now fully immersed in this world of power and secrecy, found herself questioning more than ever what her role was in this life she was leading. The Mafia boss had given her trust, had given her purpose, but with that came an overwhelming pressure she hadn't expected. The days were long and filled with tasks that grew more difficult by the hour. The more she worked with him, the more she began to realize just how much was at stake. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. The closer she got to him, the more she began to see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. One evening, after a particularly tense day, she found herself in the office again, this time with no tasks at hand but the weight of her thoughts. The Mafia boss was seated behind his desk, his eyes focused on a pile of paperwork, but his mind clearly elsewhere. She knew better than to interrupt, but something compelled her to speak. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. The boss glanced up, his eyes locking onto hers. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something, vulnerability, perhaps, before he masked it with his usual cold demeanor. "It's nothing," he replied, his voice smooth, but his tone held an edge. "Just the usual business. But it's nothing you need to worry about." She didn't buy it. She had seen him struggle with the weight of his decisions before, but this was different. This wasn't just about business. She could sense that something deeper was bothering him. "You know, you don't have to do everything alone," she said carefully, stepping closer. He didn't respond at first, just stared at her, his expression unreadable. She could feel the tension in the room, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence hung between them, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said, his gaze shifting to the window, as though he were seeing something far beyond the city lights outside. "I've learned to handle things my own way." She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The boss had always been a man who relied on himself, who trusted no one. He had built his empire on his own strength, but she knew, deep down, that even he wasn't invincible. "You don't have to do it alone," she repeated, her voice firm now. "I'm here. I'm not just your employee. I'm someone you can count on." He looked at her again, this time with a slightly softer expression. For a brief moment, she thought he might say something, but instead, he simply nodded. The moment passed, but the weight of it stayed with her. She could tell that he was conflicted between his need for control and his growing trust in her. As the days went on, the pressure only seemed to build. The Mafia boss's enemies were becoming more brazen, and the deals he had worked so hard to secure were starting to unravel. He was still the powerful figure he had always been, but she could see it in his eyes. He was losing control, and it was beginning to wear on him. One night, as she prepared to leave for the evening, he called her into his office once again. His voice was low, almost weary. "We need to move fast," he said, standing up from his desk. "There's a rival faction moving against us, and we need to shut it down before it escalates." The urgency in his tone wasn't lost on her. She had seen this side of him before, the cold, calculating strategist who always had a plan. But tonight, there was something different. He wasn't just issuing commands. He was asking for her help. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions she was feeling. He paused for a moment, as if considering his words carefully. "I need you to go undercover. You'll be in the field, gathering intel, making sure we're a step ahead." She didn't hesitate. This was the moment she had been waiting for. This was her chance to prove herself once and for all. "I'm ready," she said, her voice resolute. The boss looked at her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. Finally, he nodded. "Good. I knew you would be." The next few days were a blur of preparation. She spent hours learning the details of the operation, working with his most trusted associates, and getting herself into position. It was risky, dangerous, even, but she had never felt more alive. She was no longer just the waitress who had stumbled into this world by chance. She was a key player in a game that had no rules. The night of the operation, she found herself in an unfamiliar part of the city, in a room filled with people she had never met before. The tension in the air was palpable as they all waited for the signal. She was about to make her move, to prove her loyalty to the Mafia boss and to herself. As she took a deep breath, ready to step into the unknown, she couldn't help but think of how far she had come. From the moment she had entered this world, she had been pushed to her limits, tested in ways she never imagined. And now, she was on the verge of something bigger than she had ever dreamed possible. She had earned his trust, and tonight, she would earn her place in this world once and for all. I hope you are ready for the next phase in this story because things are about to get even more intense. The night had arrived. The mission was set. She had spent the past few days preparing, gathering intel, and slowly becoming a part of the network that would execute the operation. Everything had led to this moment. This was the test that would solidify her place in the Mafia boss's world. She stood in the shadows of the building, feeling the weight of the task ahead. The street was quiet, the night air cool against her skin as she adjusted her attire. She had learned quickly that blending in was essential. Every detail had to be perfect. As she stepped into the building, she noticed her heartbeat quicken. The dimly lit hallway stretched out before her, the sounds of hushed conversations echoing off the walls. She was close now. The meeting was going down in the back room, and she had to make sure everything went smoothly. She had been briefed thoroughly, what to say, what to do, and most importantly, what not to do. She wasn't supposed to make a scene. She wasn't supposed to show emotion. She was supposed to be invisible. But as she moved deeper into the building, her mind wandered back to the boss's words. You're no longer just a waitress. You're a key player now. She didn't know whether to be honored or terrified. This was the world she had stepped into, and there was no turning back. The door to the back room was just ahead. She paused, her hand resting on the cold metal knob. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. Inside, the room was filled with men she had never met. Their faces were all serious, their eyes scanning the room with the kind of calculating precision she had seen in the boss. But there was one person she recognized, a man sitting at the table, clearly in charge of the operation. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. You're late, he said, his voice low, though it held no warmth. She didn't flinch. I was delayed, she replied, stepping inside. She could feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, but she held her ground. She wasn't just here to watch. She was here to prove that she belonged. The man at the table motioned for her to sit. You're the one who's been running things for the boss, right? He asked. She nodded. That's right. He studied her for a moment, then smirked. I've heard a lot about you. You've made quite the impression. She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning, but she didn't react. She had learned that silence could be just as powerful as words in this world. The meeting began, the conversation shifting to business. There were talk of territories, shipments, and the usual underworld dealings. But the tension in the air was palpable. The men around the table were anxious, waiting for something, and she could feel it. She had to stay focused. She had to do her part. But as the conversation continued, her thoughts began to drift. Something was off. There was an edge to the way they spoke, a hint of something more dangerous looming beneath the surface. And then she saw it. One of the men at the table, his hand subtly reaching toward a concealed weapon beneath the table. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore. This was a setup. In an instant, she knew what she had to do. She had to act fast, or everything would fall apart. Without hesitation, she slid her hand toward the side of her jacket, where she knew a small firearm was concealed. The room went silent as her fingers grazed the cool metal of the gun. She could feel the weight of it in her hand, but she didn't draw it yet. She was waiting for the right moment. The man at the table who had been eyeing her earlier suddenly made his move, pulling his weapon out. But before he could react, she was already on her feet, her gun aimed directly at him. The tension was thick. Everything moved in slow motion as she stood there, her eyes locked onto the man's. The room was still, every person in the room frozen, unsure of what was about to happen. I don't want trouble, she said, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving the man. But I can't let this go any further. The man paused, his eyes narrowing, clearly weighing his options. But in the end, he knew she had the upper hand. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, a defeated look in his eyes. She didn't let her guard down, but she knew the immediate danger had passed. The room was tense, the silence deafening, until the boss's voice echoed in her ear. Well done. She didn't flinch at the sound of his voice, but something inside her shifted. She had passed the test. She had proven herself. But she had also crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the rest of the men in the room began to stand down, she felt a surge of adrenaline. She had done it. She had kept control. She had shown the world, and the boss, that she was more than just a waitress. She was a force to be reckoned with. And from that moment on, she knew things would never be the same. I hope everyone is ready for what comes next. After the intense moments of the past few days, The waitress was beginning to feel the true weight of the life she had chosen. Her bond with the Mafia boss had deepened, but the world she was now part of was becoming more dangerous with each passing day. She had proven herself, but as the stakes rose, so did the risks. It was a Saturday night when things took a turn. The boss had invited her to a private dinner meeting. He had mentioned something about a new development in their operations, and she knew it would be important. As she arrived at the luxurious estate, she was greeted by the usual cold silence that surrounded his world. The staff moved quickly, performing their duties without a word, as if they were part of an invisible machine. The house was just as imposing as ever, gleaming marble floors, golden chandeliers hanging overhead, and an air of quiet power that seemed to permeate every room. She followed the assistant to the dining room, where the boss was already seated at the head of the table, a glass of wine in hand. "Come in," he said with a slight smile, his tone more welcoming than usual. As she entered the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. She took her seat across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've been thinking," the boss began, his voice steady, but there was something new in his demeanor, a level of seriousness that made her stomach twist. "We've come a long way, and things are moving faster than I anticipated." He paused, taking a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "I need you to understand what's at stake. It's not just about the money or the power, it's about survival. My empire is built on loyalty, and there are those who would destroy it if given the chance." She nodded, her mind racing. She had always known the risks, but hearing it in such stark terms made her realize just how deep she was now. "I've trusted you," the boss continued, his voice softening just a fraction. "You've earned my respect, but there are those who want to test that trust. You need to be ready for anything. No one in this world is safe, no matter how powerful they are." His words sent a chill down her spine. She had never truly understood the depth of the danger until now. The Mafia boss was right. This wasn't just a job, it was a war. She was part of it now, whether she liked it or not. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. He studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I believe you are, but I need you to go further. There's someone we need to deal with, someone who's been undermining my operations. I need you to get close to him, learn everything you can, and when the time is right, eliminate him." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known that there would be moments like this, but actually hearing them from him, seeing the cold determination in his eyes, made her question everything. "What if I can't get close to him?" she asked, trying to mask the fear in her voice. "You will," he said, his tone firm. "You're more than capable. I've seen you handle situations with far more pressure. This is just one more step." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The man he was referring to was dangerous, ruthless, and she knew this task wouldn't be easy. But it was clear that the boss had already decided her fate. "I'll do it," she said, though her mind was already racing with the logistics of the plan. How would she get close to this man? What would it take to gather the necessary intel? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of strategy. The boss went over the details of the operation, and as she listened, she realized just how much was on the line. This wasn't just a mission. It was the turning point. If she succeeded, she would solidify her place in his world, but if she failed, the thought sent a wave of unease through her. She had no choice but to succeed. As the meeting came to a close, the boss leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "This is your chance to prove yourself," he said, his voice softer now. "But remember, once you step into that world, there's no going back." She nodded, but inside, a part of her was already questioning everything. Could she really pull this off? Could she handle the consequences of getting too close to someone like that? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear, she couldn't back out now. As she left the estate that night, her thoughts were consumed by the task ahead. The streets seemed darker, more dangerous, as she made her way to her car. She was alone, with nothing but the weight of the mission ahead pressing down on her. The world she had entered was cold, ruthless, and full of betrayal. But it was also where she had found herself, where she had found purpose. The Mafia boss had trusted her, and now she had to prove that she was worthy of that trust. As the city lights blurred around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She was no longer just a part of the team. She was about to become a key player in a game where only the strongest survived. I hope you're all ready for the next chapter, as this one brings the stakes even higher. The days leading up to the operation felt like a blur. The weight of the task ahead pressed heavily on her mind. She was about to confront someone dangerous, someone who had the power to bring everything crashing down. But she couldn't afford to let fear take over. She had come too far to back out now. The boss's instructions were clear. She was to infiltrate the rival faction, gain their trust, and gather information. It wasn't just about intel anymore. It was about survival. The deeper she got, the more she realized that her place in the Mafia world wasn't just a job. It was a game where one wrong move could cost her everything. The day of the mission, she stood in front of a rundown building, the evening sun casting long shadows on the street. The air was thick with tension as she took a deep breath, adjusting her coat and mentally preparing for what was to come. This was no longer a world of cold business meetings and quiet conversations. This was the heart of the underworld, where people didn't hesitate to eliminate threats. She had to be smart. She had to play the part and keep her emotions in check. She knocked on the door, her pulse racing, but her exterior calm. The man who opened it was older, grizzled, and had the look of someone who had been through far too much. He glanced at her, sizing her up, before motioning for her to come inside. "You're late," he said gruffly, but there was no malice in his tone. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." "I'm here now," she replied, her voice steady. As she stepped inside, she could feel the eyes of the others on her. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with smoke. This wasn't a place for pleasantries. It was a place for business. And it was clear that the people here had no interest in anything other than getting down to business. "So, what's this all about?" the man asked, motioning for her to sit at the table. She took a seat, careful to maintain eye contact without giving away any hints of her true intentions. This wasn't just about her getting information. This was about making sure she didn't get caught in a lie, about staying one step ahead. She had been trained to read people, to understand their intentions before they even spoke. But tonight, everything felt different. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could feel every move, every glance, being watched. "I've heard a lot about your operation," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm interested in doing business, in working together." The man across from her raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And what exactly do you bring to the table?" "I bring connections," she replied, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "I know people who can help expand your reach. I'm connected in ways that could make this operation much more profitable for both of us." The words came easily, but she could feel the weight of the lie on her shoulders. She had no such connections, but they didn't need to know that. It wasn't about what she had. It was about what they thought she could offer. "And why should I trust you?" the man asked, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You've got nothing to show for it." She forced a smile, keeping her voice steady. "You don't have to trust me. Not yet. But you will. You'll see the value I bring." The tension in the room grew thicker as the seconds ticked by. It was almost unbearable. She could feel the eyes of the other men in the room on her, silently judging, silently waiting for her to slip up. She had to keep calm. She had to stay in control. Finally, the man gave a slight nod. "All right, let's see what you can do. But don't think for a second that you'll get away with anything. If you betray us, you won't live to regret it." His words were a warning, but they also felt like a promise. The risk was real. She had walked into a world of danger, and now there was no way out. The next few hours were a blur of meetings and negotiations. She gathered information, made alliances, and did her best to fit in. But all the while, she was painfully aware of how fragile this world was, how quickly it could all unravel. She had to keep playing the part, had to keep moving forward. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about survival. As she left the building later that night, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up the charade. She had earned the boss's trust, but now, she had to earn it again. She had to prove herself over and over, not just to him, but to everyone in this ruthless world. The next few days were a blur of activity. The information she had gathered was passed along to the boss, and he seemed satisfied with her progress. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. Every time she crossed paths with him, there was a look in his eyes, a certain softness that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if there was more to their relationship than just business. Was there something personal there? She wasn't sure, and it scared her. She had never been someone who relied on others, but as the days went on, she found herself relying on him more and more. And that, more than anything, was the real danger. Because once you started trusting someone in this world, you could lose everything. I hope you're prepared for the next twist in this intense journey. The days following the mission felt like a whirlwind. She had infiltrated the rival faction, gained their trust, and learned valuable information. But as the mission progressed, she couldn't shake the sense of unease that had taken root deep inside her. The boss's approval, though rewarding, only deepened her inner conflict. She was more deeply involved in this world than she had ever expected, and with every step, the stakes grew higher. The boss's trust had given her a sense of purpose, but it also meant that her actions carried a weight she had never anticipated. One evening, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened, her phone buzzed. It was the boss. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. His tone was sharp, more urgent than usual. "We've got a problem. A big one. Meet me in an hour." He didn't say more, and she knew better than to ask. She quickly prepared herself, knowing that whatever this was, it was serious. When she arrived at the location, a dimly lit room in one of the boss's safe houses, the atmosphere was tense. The boss was already there, speaking with a few of his most trusted men. As she walked in, the conversation stopped, and all eyes turned to her. "You're here," the boss said, his expression serious. "We've got an informant. Someone inside our operation has been leaking information to our rivals. We need to find out who it is before they cause more damage." The weight of his words hit her immediately. This wasn't just about protecting their empire anymore. This was about betrayal. She had always known that loyalty was paramount in this world, but to have someone so close to them turn on them was a different kind of danger. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice calm despite the rising tension in the room. "We have a suspect," the boss replied, his eyes narrowing. "But we need to be sure. I want you to talk to him. Get close, learn everything you can. We can't afford any mistakes." The words were simple, but the task was daunting. The man they suspected had been working with the boss for years. To turn on him now was a betrayal that could tear everything apart. But she had no choice. She had made her decision when she entered this world. "I'll handle it," she said, though her heart was heavy with the weight of the task ahead. Over the next few days, she worked in silence, following the suspect, gathering intel, trying to piece together what was happening. But the deeper she went, the more she realized just how complex the situation had become. The man they suspected was more than just a mole. He had connections that ran deep, connections that could unravel everything the boss had built. She had to be careful. One wrong move could expose her, could expose all of them. As she continued her investigation, the tension between her and the boss grew. Their relationship had always been professional, but now, there was something else beneath the surface. She couldn't tell if it was trust or something deeper, something she wasn't ready to face. The lines between loyalty and personal connection were beginning to blur. Then, the moment she had been dreading finally came. She had uncovered enough evidence to confirm that the suspect was indeed the informant. But revealing this would put her in a dangerous position. The boss trusted her, but he also trusted the man who had betrayed them. She couldn't escape the feeling that the boss might not be as ready to believe the truth as she was. She met with him later that evening, her heart pounding in her chest. As she walked into his office, the weight of everything she had uncovered pressed down on her. The boss was seated at his desk, as always, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her hesitate for a moment. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice sharper than usual. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. "I've found the leak," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "The man you trusted, he's been working with our rivals. I have the proof." The silence that followed was deafening. The boss didn't speak, didn't move. For a moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake, if revealing the truth would cost her everything. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold. "I've suspected this for a while," he said quietly, "but I didn't want to believe it." The admission shocked her. She had expected anger, maybe even violence, but this was something else. This was disappointment. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The boss stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now we deal with it," he said, his tone firm. "And I need you to handle it. You've proven you can get the job done. Now prove you can finish it. She nodded, a sense of determination settling over her. This was her chance to prove herself once and for all, to show the boss that she was more than just a pawn in his world. But as she walked out of the office, ready to carry out her mission, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that would change everything. She wasn't just in the boss's world now, she was part of it. And there was no going back. I hope everyone is ready for the final chapter in this story, because it's all leading to an intense conclusion. The days following the revelation about the informant were filled with pressure and uncertainty. She had uncovered the truth, but now, it was time to act. The boss had given her the responsibility, and she couldn't afford to fail. The plan was set, and there was no turning back. As she prepared for the final step, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had entered this world as just another face in the crowd, a simple waitress with no real future. But now, she was a key player in a dangerous game, and every decision she made carried the weight of everything she had worked for. The night before the operation, she couldn't sleep. The tension in her body was overwhelming. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. She had to confront the man who had betrayed them, and she knew the consequences would be severe. She had no choice but to go through with it. As dawn broke the next day, she stood outside the safe house, waiting for the signal. She was ready, but her mind kept racing. What would happen after this? Would things ever go back to the way they were? Or would this be the turning point that changed everything? When the signal came, she moved swiftly, her heart pounding as she entered the building. The familiar faces were already gathered in the dimly lit room, their eyes scanning her every move. They knew why she was here. They knew what had to be done. The boss was waiting for her, his eyes cold and calculating as ever. He didn't speak immediately, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. She had done everything he asked, and now it was time for the final test. The informant was already in the room, his eyes nervously darting around as he realized what was happening. She could see the fear in his eyes, the recognition that his fate was sealed. She felt no sympathy for him. This was the price of betrayal. The boss spoke first, his voice low and unwavering. "You know why you're here," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You've crossed the line, and now you will pay the price." The informant trembled, his hands shaking as he looked around the room, but no one spoke in his defense. He was alone now, and he knew it. The room was heavy with the tension of what was about to happen. The boss motioned for her to step forward. She did without hesitation, her steps measured and deliberate. The informant's eyes met hers, his desperation palpable. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to." She interrupted him, her voice firm. "You made your choice. Now, you live with the consequences." As she spoke, she felt a strange sense of finality. This was the moment that would define her, her loyalty to the boss, her place in this world. She had crossed the line just as he had. The weight of that realization didn't hit her until she looked into the eyes of the man who had betrayed them. He had once been trusted, but now he was nothing more than a liability. She raised her hand, signaling to the others. The decision had been made. The informant was led away, and she didn't look back. The boss stood quietly, watching her closely, as if waiting for her to show some kind of reaction. But she didn't. She had done what needed to be done. As she left the building later that night, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The world she had entered was brutal and unforgiving, but she had survived. She had proven herself. She had earned her place. The following days were filled with reflection. The mission had been completed successfully, but something had changed. The boss seemed different toward her now, less distant, less cold. He had always been the one to keep people at arm's length, but now, she saw a shift in the way he treated her. He trusted her more than ever. She wasn't just a part of his world now. She was someone he relied on. The relationship between them had shifted, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. One evening, as she entered his office, she found him standing by the window, staring out over the city. He didn't turn when she entered, but she could feel his presence. "You did well," he said without looking at her. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, something softer, something more personal than she had ever heard from him before. She wasn't sure how to respond. This wasn't the same man she had met at the beginning of this journey. He had trusted her, relied on her, and she had earned his respect. But with that came something else, something she wasn't ready to face. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've earned more than that, he replied, turning to face her. You've earned my loyalty. You've proven yourself to be more than just someone I work with. His words hit her harder than she expected. She had always known the stakes, always known the risks. But now, she was beginning to understand the true cost of the life she had chosen. There was no going back now. What happens next? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. We move forward, he said, stepping closer. Together. The words lingered in the air, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this world could offer more than just survival. Maybe it could offer a place where she truly belonged. In this gripping tale of betrayal, power, and trust, a young woman rises through the dangerous underworld, proving her worth to a mafia boss and becoming an unlikely key player in his world. As she navigates the perilous path of loyalty and survival, their connection deepens, leading to a complex relationship filled with twists. Romance stories often explore the delicate balance between love and loyalty, and this one is no different. The woman, initially just a waitress, is thrust into a world where trust is a rare commodity, and every decision could be her last. As she works closely with the mafia boss, their bond grows, turning into something more than just business. Through betrayal and danger, their connection becomes undeniable, setting the stage for a deeper emotional journey. The unfolding events of this story offer an intriguing blend of suspense and romance, capturing the essence of what it means to trust in a world where everyone has an agenda. Romance stories like this explore the complexity of relationships, where the lines between loyalty, love, and ambition blur. Will they find redemption, or will the world they live in tear them apart? As the stakes rise, so does the passion and tension, making this a captivating journey of trust, betrayal, and love. Dive into this story of unexpected romance, where every twist and turn challenges the very essence of what it means to love and be loved. Romance stories keep you on the edge of your seat, and this one is no exception.